Close your eyes for a moment and feel the subtle hum under your skin, the quickened pulse at the base of the throat, the tiny shiver behind the eyes, the sense that the room has shifted ever so slightly while nothing in your hands or feet has changed. If you have noticed that hum in the last months or years, if sudden synchronicities, slips of time, or an uncanny sense of not this have been following you, stop telling yourself it's only imagination. You weren't imagining it. You entered a new timeline, and there is both scientific language and metaphysical counsel that can help you understand what happened and how to hold it. I want to say that plainly. You weren't hallucinating. The sensation of vibration, the widening of perception, the sudden reordering of what you thought was probable, these are real phenomena, reported across traditions, described by people who study consciousness, and even reflected in the work of one remarkable inventor and thinker, Itzhak Bentov. His life, his measurements, and the questions he raised create a bridge between the felt, interior shift you recognize and a larger field of possibility. And then there is another voice, one channeled through Jane Roberts, calling itself SETH, that names these experiences in terms of timeline movement and offers a map for centering within them. If this idea already stirs something in you, type in the comments now, "I entered a new timeline." Let that simple phrase be a marker, not proof to anyone but yourself, but a small public truth that affirms you are not alone. Itzhak Bentov's story gives texture to the feeling many of you described. Born in 1923 in what was then Czechoslovakia, he survived the horrors of the mid-20th century and went on to become an inventor and engineer known for elegant medical devices and for a restless curiosity about life itself. Bentov emigrated to Israel and later to the United States. He filed patents, worked on early biomedical instrumentation, and, most notably for our purposes, published a short, unconventional book in 1977 called Stalking the Wild Pendulum, which explored vibration, consciousness, and the idea that the human body and mind are resonant systems capable of interacting with much larger fields. Bentov approached these questions from the position of an engineer who loved metaphor as much as math. He proposed that the human body produces microvibrations, small mechanical reverberations tied to things like the aortic pulse, and that under certain conditions, these vibrations can interact with brain rhythms such as the alpha wave pattern and with environmental electromagnetic frequencies, like the Schumann resonance of the planet. He was not making a poetic claim alone. He described measurements and mechanisms that suggested a continuity between bodily oscillations and very low-frequency fields in which we live. There is something almost cinematic about his end. Bentov died aboard American Airlines Flight 191 when the plane crashed upon takeoff from Chicago on May 25, 1979. The loss of someone who had been thinking aloud about resonance and the hidden architecture of experience feeds the modern imagination. The inventor who mapped subtle vibrations, gone in a violent instant. For some, timing and circumstance raise questions. For others, the real point is less the manner of his passing and more his insistence that our bodies are not closed machines but open instruments, constantly picking up and sometimes aligning with fields beyond the visible. Bentov used two images that are useful for us: the tuning fork and the slit in a wall. Imagine an orchestra tuning to a very pure tone. A single instrument can nudge the others toward its pitch. Or imagine a narrow slit cut in a wall of perception. As species evolve or as individuals open, that slit widens. A wider slit lets more frequencies through. More frequencies mean more possibilities. Bentov proposed cautiously and metaphorically that as that slit widens for certain individuals or groups, resonance phenomena, previously too faint to notice, begin to assert themselves in experience. Déjà vu becomes not a glitch but a contact point. Synchronicities proliferate because the field's probability landscape has rearranged. Take a moment now to check how real that sounds. You who have felt a shift, does the tuning fork image fit? Does the slit in a wall make sense when you think of how sudden the new alternatives have appeared in your life? If so, write in the comments, "I entered a new timeline." Let that be your small witness.
When we say timeline, many people hear only sci-fi, but that image can be usefully literalized without invoking time machines. Think of timelines as overlapping patterns of probabilities, possible sequences of events that are more or less likely given present conditions. Those probabilities are not written on stone. They are sensitive to the fields of information and attention that human consciousness participates in. This is where Bentov's resonant body meets a metaphysical model offered by SETH, channeled through Jane Roberts. SETH, channeled through Jane Roberts. Timelines are not locked highways, but rivers that sometimes run side by side. Consciousness is the vessel that navigates, sometimes slipping into an adjacent current. Do not call this mysticism alone. Call it a description of how probability rearranges when attention, resonance, and intent shift together. That is SETH's voice as relayed through Jane Roberts, practical, slightly formal, and insisting that interior experience has exterior consequence. SETH frames the shift you felt not as a private anomaly, but as an actual movement of your consciousness into a different attractor, an energetic pattern whose local events differ slightly or profoundly from the pattern you habitually lived inside. Let's ground that in the mechanism Bentov described and in what modern researchers have been exploring. Bentov drew attention to the body's mechanical microvibrations, the subtle pulses of tissue and fluid set off by the heartbeat and respiratory cycle, and suggested that these are not merely physiological ephemera, but a vehicle for information. When you slow and steady your breath, when you practice particular meditative stances, you change the way those microvibrations organize. In turn, those organized patterns can better resonate with global fields like the Schumann resonance, or with the brain's alpha rhythms, which are associated with relaxed, receptive awareness. If a group's coherent attention aligns with a new attractor long enough, the combined effect on the probability field becomes measurable, at least in principle. Bentov's bell curve of awakening is a way to visualize this. Most people occupy the central hump, unaware or minimally receptive. A growing minority occupy the rising tail, more sensitive and more able to shift. A smaller group sits at the extreme edges, integrating and stabilizing new modes of perception. As that tail lengthens, the landscape of what is probable shifts, and those who have widened their slit may find themselves experiencing events that look like a sudden entry into a different timeline. There are social consequences to this. History is full of people, prophets, mystics, scientists, whose experiences were pathologized or dismissed. The parable of Paul on the road to Damascus is an archetype, a sudden reorientation of perception leading to a radically different life. In modern contexts, psychiatry and institutions have sometimes labeled expanded perception as aberrant rather than ecstatic. That pattern matters because it shapes how people report their experiences and whether they get help, curiosity, or suppression. And institutions have been curious. Declassified documents and program descriptions indicate that military and intelligence agencies have taken an interest in altered states and remote cognition. The Gateway program and related studies examined whether states of consciousness could be correlated with performance in unconventional tasks. Interest here does not equal malice by default. It registers strategic concern. The implication is that the phenomenon of altered perception, if it confers functional advantages, carries political and social stakes. That is why openness, transparency, and decentralized skill building become ethical priorities. The tools for aligning with new timelines are too important to be hoarded. But before fear takes hold, let's return to what is practical and present. The core claim we are making, central to this video and to the title you clicked on, is this. The felt shift you experienced is not necessarily an illusion. There is a model in which you literally moved, in a probabilistic sense, into an attractor whose events differ from the earlier stream.
SETH, channeled through Jane Roberts, offers language and guidance for that movement, and Bentov offers empirical metaphors and measurements that make the movement intelligible. SETH, channeled through Jane Roberts. You were not merely imagining an alternate script, you selected a different resonance. Once chosen, the universe rearranges probabilities around the clarity of your attention. This rearrangement is subtle. It begins as a ringing in the body, a soft tug at the edges of your expectations, then ripples outward through circumstance. What does it feel like when you have moved into a new timeline? There are signatures. First, a sense of mismatch at scale. People, places, or things that should have continued as before now feel off, either friendlier, stranger, or simply not fitting. Second, an increase in synchronicity. Coincidences that are meaningful begin to stack. Third, a divergence in outcomes. Patterns of decision-making that used to produce one result now tilt toward another. None of these signs is proof by itself, but together they are a usable pattern. You can treat them like evidence. Here is a simple way to test without inventing drama. Keep a very short log, no more than a line a day, of 3 things. A small unexpected alignment, a phone call, a meeting, a phrase overheard, an inner sensation, tingle, expansion, déjà vu, and an outcome where expectation and result diverged. Over a month, these micro-evidences will either cluster or disperse. If they cluster, you are likely experiencing a sustained alignment with a new attractor. This is not mystical bragging, it's method. Notice, record, and let the pattern speak. When you find yourself in a new corridor of probability, your immediate task is not to run or hide, but to stabilize. Stabilization is a practice. There is a breathing-based entrainment technique adapted here from Bentov's interest in body resonance and framed in SETH's language of alignment. Call it the SETH Adapted Coherence Practice. It is simple, gentle, and designed to bring your micro-vibrations and attention into a steady, cooperative rhythm. Find a place where you can sit comfortably for 5 minutes. If you have cardiovascular or respiratory conditions, consider consulting a medical professional before doing breath exercises. Always practice within your comfort. Sit with an upright posture that feels effortless. Place one hand lightly on your chest and one on your belly to feel the movement of breath. Begin with natural breathing for a few cycles, letting the out-breath be as full as the in-breath. Then adopt a gentle count. Inhale for 4. Hold a comfortable balance for a very short moment if that is comfortable for you. Exhale for 4. Rest for a beat, then inhale for 4 again. You may use the simple rhythm of 4 counts in and 4 counts out. If 4 feels rushed, use 3. If it feels long, use 5, but keep the breath even. The essential aim is equality and steadiness, not strain. As you breathe, bring attention to a small internal vibration. The soft place under the breastbone, the tiny flutter at the throat, the resonance in the palm. Imagine the breath as a tuning fork striking that tone. With each cycle, feel the vibration lengthen and deepen as if the tone takes on more color. If an image helps, picture a narrow slit widening into a small window. Do this for 3 to 5 minutes. When you finish, rest with eyes open and notice the field around you. Has anything subtly rearranged? Did some thought or decision feel lighter? Keep the journaling habit described above, 3 lines a day for the week after this practice. That habit is not a guarantee of dramatic results. It's a training of attention. And attention, Seth reminds us, is the instrument that chooses. Seth, channeled through Jane Roberts. Consciousness is a pattern of choice. The breath sharpens and steadies the pattern. You will not be guaranteed fireworks, but you will increase the chance that your vessel resonates with the attractor you seek. A few practical cautions here. Do not interpret every odd occurrence as evidence of a timeline shift. Do not abandon ordinary responsibility, thinking that an altered attractor absolves you of consequence. And do not engage in extreme breath work beyond your comfort zone or medical condition. The practice offered here is intentionally moderate. It is coherence building, not breath hold or hyperventilation. If you are pregnant, have a history of cardiovascular, respiratory, or seizure conditions, check with a medical professional before engaging in breath practices. There is also an ethical dimension that Seth emphasizes. Timeline mobility confers responsibility. If you can move into an attractor that offers different outcomes, use that capacity not merely for personal advantage, but for integration. To repair, to heal, to align with compassion. Power without integration tends towards separation. If you move into a timeline where opportunities open easier, remember the network of people whose timelines may be constrained. Each shift you anchor has ripple effects. Now let us look again at institutional interest. Why would strategic organizations study these phenomena? Because if perception can be trained to reliably correlate with particular outcomes, the capacity becomes a tool for prediction and influence. Declassified materials and program histories show that agencies were willing to invest in unusual methods, remote viewing, altered states, entrainment, seeking any systematic edge. That interest does not automatically indicate conspiracies. It indicates that the phenomenon is consequential. The remedy to secrecy is not paranoia, but democratization. Learn the core skills openly, share methods, and maintain ethical clarity in how you apply them. Remember Bentov's image of the bell curve. As more individuals climb into the tail of heightened sensitivity, the collective field shifts. Sometimes this happens gradually. Sometimes it feels abrupt. For those who have felt the abruptness, an uncanny drop into a new set of possibilities, the danger is to either minimize the experience or inflate it into a life-consuming fixation. A balanced path is validate, investigate, practice, integrate. Let me give you a short checklist, practical steps to orient yourself if you felt a shift. 1. Notice and affirm. Use a short phrase, "I entered a new timeline," to anchor your internal recognition. 2. Record micro-evidence daily for 2 to 4 weeks. 3. Practice the SETH-adapted coherence breath for 5 minutes a day, observing limits and comfort. 4. Slow decisions for 48 hours when major choices appear suddenly after a shift. Let the new pattern settle. 5. Share cautiously with a trusted circle. Community slows distortion and offers feedback. 6. Use ethical intention. Ask how your newly opened possibilities can support the common good. SETH, channeled through Jane Roberts. The present is not a trap. It is a field of selection. Your choices matter, the way tiny adjustments of a dial change radio stations. Do not believe the arrogance of those who treat this knowledge as a secret advantage. The path forward is learning to harmonize, not dominate. Let's make the signs of a timeline entry a little sharper. Watch for these markers in the days that follow a strong felt shift. Repeated numbers or symbols that carry clear personal meaning. Circumstances aligning to ease a previously persistent obstacle. Memories of an event that feels slightly altered in tone when compared to others' recollections. And an emerging ability to sense potential outcomes before they resolve. These are not infallible. They are indicators. Treat them like instruments that require tuning. You might wonder whether this is all merely correlation. Does paying attention create a map where none existed? This is a fair scientific question. Bentov's contribution is not a closed-form proof. He offered measurements and metaphors that permitted others to ask testable questions about resonance and perception. SETH's contribution is a phenomenological and metaphysical framing that gives meaning and guidance to those experiences. Together, they suggest a program. Observe, measure where possible, practice coherence, and build community protocols for ethical engagement. There is one more practical point often overlooked: the role of the physical environment in anchoring new timelines. The field you enter is not entirely interior. Surroundings signal and sustain resonance. Small changes in your environment, adding a sound source that supports alpha coherence, altering lighting to reduce flicker and tension, placing an object that carries intentional meaning, helps stabilize a new attractor. Bentov would have liked that. The instrument both shapes and is shaped by what it hears. At the climax of this reflection, we return to the claim you came for. You weren't imagining it, you entered a new timeline. This is not a fashionable slogan. It is a hypothesis grounded in a set of interlocking observations: physical resonance in the body, modulation of brain rhythms, environmental electromagnetic fields, the collective dynamics of attention, and experiential reports that map onto those mechanisms. SETH, channeled through Jane Roberts, provides a metaphysical lens that names and normalizes the experience, and he emphasizes responsibility and integration. SETH, channeled through Jane Roberts, say to yourself now, I have entered a new timeline. This is not boastfulness but recognition. With recognition becomes practice, you can learn to steady and direct your course. If this resonates, write in the comments exactly, I entered a new timeline. Let that phrase be a small communal experiment, 2 elements of proof. First, the interior confirmation that it matches your feeling. Second, the public mark that allows others to see they are not alone. Before we close, a final note on discernment. Not every unusual experience signals a shift. Trauma, sleep disturbance, substance effects, and certain medical conditions can mimic perception changes. If your experiences are distressing, interfered with daily functioning, or accompanied by confusion and fear, seek professional support. The work of exploring timelines is not a substitute for healthcare or psychological help when needed. The breath practice is gentle and designed to be safe for most people, but check with a doctor if you have serious medical concerns. You have, by arriving at this idea, an opportunity. The future is not a fixed track, but a landscape you can learn to move through with care. Use curiosity instead of fear. Use the tools, observation, measurement, breath, community, ethics to turn a disorienting sensation into a stable instrument for compassionate choice. If you want to go deeper, subscribe and turn on notifications. I will post a guided, extended coherence session and a walkthrough of Bentov's metaphors alongside source references in the description. There, you'll find links to Stalking the Wild Pendulum and to declassified material discussing institutional research into altered states in remote perception so you can follow the trail for yourself. Finally, a short affirmation to close with. Speak it aloud or hold it quietly inside. I recognize the shift. I study my attention. I move with care and compassion. You entered a new timeline. Now learn to live in it well.